Introduce me and say, that line, oh, what a difference a day makes. I feel like saying, oh, what a difference a year makes. Here we all are. And if for what else, I have my shiny face on and my red lipstick on, and I'm hoping we're going to have a good afternoon. And first, in a more appropriate way, may I acknowledge the land on which we meet today. May I acknowledge our elders, both past and present, and Aboriginal people who are with us today and who are joining in with us in the work that we so much, and I will say professionally, are committed to, and I will say enjoy. It's a dang good job, and it's hard to pull yourself away from it. And this year has allowed me to continue that engagement in so many lovely schools. And many of those people are here today, and I'd like to thank them once again. And Helen was going to join us, but Helen is entering, Emeritus Professor Helen Timpley is entering into a new phase of her life. She could be sailing as we speak, she could be holidaying as we speak, so I'm taking on responsibility of ensuring that you have access to some of her work. She engaged with colleagues of mine in Early Action for Success in 2017. And what I would like to do today is share with you what we learnt and the story of how that emerged and how that can continue to impact schools, and certainly is impacting the schools I'm working with at the moment because of the nature of the quality of her findings. Let me share where we're at. And I've got a clicker and I've got a... Yes, and Alan will gong me. I know he will if I go too long. So where are we at? Well, here's... As tellers of stories as we all are, here's where we started. It was the kickoff. ATSL put out a document. It was a literature review. It was commissioned by ATSL and it asked Helen Timpley to consider the professional conversations and improvement-focused feedback evidence in Australia at that time. And I had kept in good contact with Helen and continued to since 2010. And when this appeared, I read it very closely because Helen's a dang good writer. And I was working through it, thinking that this would actually provide insight and ways forward. Because there was a long history working with Helen for us engaging in professional conversations, stemming out of not only her work, with working with Lorna Earle from Canada, but in other permutations, notwithstanding my background in working in observations and providing feedback to teachers, training in particular interventions. So when I work through it, and I work through it right at the end, there's a little comment, and it said, all that I've viewed, all that I've interviewed, all that I found leads me to this. There is a rich history of coaching in Australia, but there's the emphasis is on a reflective process, but I can't find evidence of coaching that leads specifically to student outcomes in a research base. And I thought, holy dooly, that's a bit interesting. So I rang Helen and I said, you've put out a challenge of where the research needs to go. Yes. I said, would you like to work with me? And her line was, oh, no. And then over time, she agreed, and as they do. And we set up a structure, and it used all sorts of ways of operating. In fact, some of the people who participate in that process are in the room today. In fact, I think significant numbers of the 20 people who worked with Helen and I and our team are actually here today. So they probably could tell the story better than I can. But what we did was this. We asked the question, if we take a range of instructional leaders, and in my next session I'll talk more about their roles in the system, but if we can ask 20 people to join us who will work in partnerships, then work in small teams, would they make the commitment to Helen and I in that they would do the following? At points in time across the year, they would submit a transcript of their conversation with a teacher they were currently working with. And as a result of that, submit their transcript, which was about 100 lines, about 10 minutes of hard transcription, to Helen. And then she would critique it then there would be points in time of two things occurring. Though the teams would meet by Skype or Zoom or whatever we could get to work on the day with Helen in Auckland and us in all points across New South Wales. We had people working west from the far northwest. We had a team here in Sydney. We had coastal teams, north and south, and all points in between. So what would happen was this commitment to the taping yourself, submitting your transcript, then coming together in two ways. One, as a team of 4, so there was 20 and there were 4 in the team, working with Helen via Skype through an analysis of your work. And then in a second phase, at points in time of the year, several points of time during the year, the team would come to Sydney and work face-to-face with Helen, which was a day of examining transcripts and looking at our practice. The commitment was we had 4 cycles, and at the end of the 4th cycle, Helen gathered those transcripts one last time. But what she also did, worked with Louise Green, who was working with me at the time, and an independent assessor. We actually got responses from the participants. So we had not only quantifiable data on student outcomes, but we had qualitative data. And what I want to share with you today is what we found as a result of that process. So it was quite new, groundbreaking in that we actually worked with the transcripts and looked at them in multiple tiers. Let me share how we went. So this was what had happened. In that document, Helen had outlined what were the enables professional conversation. So right from the get-go, we as a team not only just accepted that, oh, this is what Helen did, Helen actually engaged the team in refining where we were going in consideration of these enablers that emerged out of the research. And I would like to take some more time to share those with you as we proceed. So we had this was the resource. We had the AITSL document, we had the enablers, which I'm coming back. And what I'm going to come back to at points in time is the design that Helen and I put together about a way forward. And let me explain where we were going in the year. So this was our commitment. We had in the yellow an actual process of the conversation that was taking place in 20 settings across New South Wales. And I would like to come back to that in a moment. And we were acknowledging there were 3 different trajectories why you would be engaged in those conversations. One of them, of course, was the analysis of professional practice. And that was one of the core or key elements of our work with Helen. But that's not to say that what the other part that we were examining was that conversation cycle would also be to consider evidence of student learning. But our emphasis over time was about the professional practice, but it did incorporate evidence. The third area, which I'm using more in my current work, is actually to problem solve, so in situations in schools, and how to use the conversation when sometimes, not always, but you need some courage in taking on a particularly challenging scenario. So they're the 3 settings in grey, but the process. But what's at the heart of that, the core of this, and it does come back, and acknowledging the work of Vivian Robinson, is that we were working through 3 trajectories, which will keep coming up in the conversation. One, that the participants in the research needed to be open to learning. One, and this was the driver, through valid information. So evidence was driving the conversation all the way. Not supposition, not old practices, not old beliefs. What was driving it was the evidence in front of us. Secondly, and the core aspect of this, again, which will ripple through the conversation today and at the in our workshop, it's the respect for self and others, the relational trust. We'll consider that as well, and that comes out of Brick's work, or Tony Brick's, or some people say it's Bryke, so I'm not sure. I've heard it said both ways over the years. And of course, the commitment by all participants to change. So that was the design that we came through. Let's explore a little bit more. So this is where I was coming from, back from my work with Vivian Robson and examination of her work, and my theory of action underpinning this work with Helen was, if the practice analysis conversations go well, we will be building trusting interpersonal relationships along the way. If we're building those trusting interpersonal relationships, what we will see, there'll be more support, commitment and job satisfaction for the teachers we were working with. Now, I will share with you that many of the participants indicated through this process they were working with beginning teachers, teachers early in their careers, and occasionally teachers very much sustained in a long career in education, and not necessarily thinking that historically that there might be much more to learn. So we were looking for that to get the support, and finally, and ultimately, because if we didn't get it, it was pointless. We actually needed student progress. And in this case, particularly, we were looking for change in student outcomes, and the focus of our inquiry was around literacy. So that was our theory. If we do this, then this will happen, so that. That was where we're heading with this. Now, why? Why were we focusing on student outcomes? Well, from my perspective, it was the mantra of my role. My goal was to shift the outcomes for our students if we were to achieve our goal of equity and excellence in public education where I worked. I saw lots of opportunities for conversations going on in schools, very reflective conversations, but not necessarily leading to change in student outcomes. That was the driver. What did it mean? So when you can see that all the time, and I'm going to show you and share some of the excerpts and reflections from the participants that Helen has made available. So it's ultimately asking at every point in time, will this lead to shift? We did want change in teacher skills, but it wasn't enough that the teachers took on new practices or new ideas. It had to lead to shift in student outcomes. So, what was the other point? Well, Helen and I had had a conversation since about 2010, and I'm going to drive the poor photographer mad, but I thought if I don't move, I'll go funny in one eye. And this was the conversation. Many years ago, I started talking to Helen about her work that was stemming from her long-term project work with Judy Parr around writing at that time across New Zealand. And what she was talking about was some iterations of working around conversations with the participants, the teachers and their coaches in New Zealand. And this is what she was sharing to me way back in 2010. She said, this is what I'm noticing, and we were having a conversation. And that was as follows. We engage in the conversation with the teacher. Yes, I said, I know what you mean. She said, we can solve the problem of the day. I said, yes. But here's the kicker. We're back there again the next week, solving another problem. And that was our quest through this conversation, that we wanted to stop the visit or the conversation that was getting enough to get through the next fortnight type mentality. It required that we have this self-regulated teacher. And we needed to think about what was going on in the conversations that led to that, as opposed to a dependency on the coach or an instructional leader. We knew we could solve the problem of the day. We had a long history of that, where we could implement an activity or an idea or a strategy and we'd get shift, but only for short term, not generative. So that was what we were working for. And why? Well, it was obvious, one of the things. Let's be frank, you can't be there all the time. But more important is, it was the teacher needs to know how to check whether any changes in practice are more effective than before. They need to own it. It's not a question of a second party, the coach or the instruction leader, being the determiner. And so that was what was driving us in this, the self-regulated, adaptive expert teacher. We were trying to move away from what we saw as an emerging phenomena of routine experts, those only able to do what they're told to do this week and next week, and then explicitly teach the third week what was due not in the second week, but in the fourth week. And what we wanted teachers to have a repertoire of capacities to solve problems, emergent problems, without resorting to the coach coming and making it all better. Ultimately, it was only a Band-Aid. So we were looking for quite significant shifts. We love, the quote that I use, that Helen and I were driven by, is the Schunk and Zimmerman, quite elderly now. But this is why, and although it refers to the learner, I like what it says and it continues to drive me, because we want the learner, in this case the teacher who the coach is working with, not so merely to be aware, but actually to self-regulate, to initiate, to motivate and direct their own efforts to acquire knowledge of skills instead of relying on others as agents of instruction. So when we talk more about the instructional role in the workshop, we'll be investigating how you can break away from the deliverer of bits, because that's my greatest fear as a coach, that I'm seen as I'm doling out. I actually want the empowered, adaptive expert as part of my team. So what was going on? Well, within the conversation, the area of our focus is what is known in industry as practice analysis conversations, and I'm watching the time, and it follows a process. So if I go quickly back to this slide, remember the cycle? So we're going to investigate the yellow, okay? We're investigating the yellow. Let's go back to it then. We're going to, within this, identify the teacher's strengths and needs based on identified student needs. But here's the kicker. The challenge in the conversation, as you'll gather, is not what I, as the coach, perceive as the teacher's needs. It'll actually come out of the teacher's understanding of their strengths and where they need to go. Why? Well, I'll walk through this one. I'm going to give you a sense of chat to talk to your colleagues. Why does it need to come from the teacher, not from the coach? Do you want to have a second just to turn to a colleague? Okay, we'll come back. So one of the drivers for me in this was I have had a long history coming of 30 years where I could recognise that sometimes it was much easier just to come in and saying, this is what you need to do. I'm going to watch you now, and then I'm going to tell you what you need to do to get better. And I've got the answers, because, hey, I'm Jan Farmer Hailey. And I realised, even though I wasn't really saying that, I was saying, I am the more knowledgeable other, and I'm going to ensure. Now, here is the kicker. I realise now, as I would going out to a school to visit the same teacher for the fourth or fifth time, that maybe I was creating a dependency factor, that I would be there to solve the problem. And I realised I had to get them to buy in to them to identify their strengths, what they were learning, and accordingly where they need to go next. Now, someone said, well, they're young teachers you're working with. How will they know where they're heading? I said, that's part of the professional learning, that they see the end in point. So they can work out from, if this is working well, I'm going to shape it. I'm not saying, what would you like me to do today? Here I am. It's more a matter of shaping the conversation, but that they can see it emerging, that it will meet their needs, not my agenda. It's very artful. So then I will observe the practice. Why? Because we've set the learning goal for the teachers within this, and accordingly determining what we're going to count as the criteria for the observation. And then finally we'll come back and we'll actually look at a way forward where we will continue to monitor the impact. So 3 parts, very straightforward. However, and that's why I feel guilty. I don't think I've got a lot of slides. And I wish I did, but I don't. Because the reality, it's quite elegant. Where the work is in the conversation. But here's the structure. We move in through a pre-observation conversation. which is absolutely critical. This is not, oh, it's Tuesday, it's 9 a.m, I need to be in Susie's room. No. It's actually a considered opportunity to meet with the teacher as the instructional leader or the coach to clarify what the teacher is hoping to achieve so that you're on the same page, and then establish the criteria for effectiveness. Now, in doing that, there is some implications. One, there are times when I've realised that talking with the teacher, and she's talking about what she thinks is X, and I realise, I don't think we're on the same page. Then I have to make a decision. Do I stop? Do we work on that mismatch? Or do we change directions? Or do I actually bring in significant opportunity for professional learning before we come back? But the reality is, unless I'd had the conversation, I wouldn't even know if there was a mismatch. So it's important to set the scene about what's the intention and what will be the success criteria for this observation. Then after the observation, we come back to analyse the practice, and through that practice, we build this joint analysis of what occurred and where to. Now, to that end, it doesn't stop there. We then co-construct a way forward. So let's look at it. We come in first. We actually, there's a conversation setting the scene. We observe, we analyse, we co-construct. Very elegant. Someone said to me, how long should this take? If that pre-observation conversation is going more than 10 or 15 minutes, in all honesty, you're killing the teacher, because they will be confused, and in the end they'll just say, whatever you think, Jan. So it's a question of that it's got to be short, snappy, well-informed. But if that's dragging on, you know you've got a problem. The observation. This is not the 45-minute lesson observation. That's too much. You have to be tight. What are you going in? What problem of practice are you going to focus on that the teacher has identified that you can support? So a 30-minute lesson, it's too much. Where will you go? So it's tightening it to see how you can change the pedagogical practice to lead to student outcomes. The analysis of practice, if you're started at 9 a.m. and you're still sitting there at 11:30 in the morning and your stomach is saying, I need coffee, you know it's too long. You have taken on too much. You have not guided well. I like to think of this as short, pivotal, nimble work. Otherwise, not only will you kill the teacher off, you'll actually, in their engagement, you'll be back doing it again the same. You need to break the cycle. I like to think that when it's going well, it's a 30-minute to 35, 40-minute conversation. An hour is too long. There's the 10 minutes, there's the teaching, and that analysis and co-construction. If it's going over the 45-minute mark, you've lost the teacher. So, what do I want to talk to you about? The one thing that came out of this was how pivotal the planning for the observation is. Absolutely critical. None of this whipping in and saying, oh yes, it's Susie, it's 9 a.m, yes, I think she wants me to have a look at a bit of a writing. I think she's having a bit of trouble getting the children to compose their stories. No. What do we need to do? One, and this is where you do your work as a coach. You are well informed before you walk in there. And this is where your time goes as a coach. And one is that you actually have to consider two pivotal questions. You have to ask, what is the evidence of student progress and achievement? You actually need to where the kids are at. Not where they were at the end of last term, and this is week 7 of the next term, but where are the children at this point in time? What evidence do you have? Not on a standardised test, on their actual work that they are engaged with in the classroom. So you've got your finger on the pulse. You also need to know where the teacher's strengths in their practice. Now, in other words, this is not something you'll gauge in the first 2 weeks of term. This has come in after a cycle of professional learning, some co-planning, co-teaching, which we'll talk in the next session. But you walk in reflecting on what do I know about this teacher's competencies, current practice, and what I know about the students. That's why when you get together with a teacher and they know where they're heading, you're right on the money. But if you're flicking through trying to remember this teacher and what they went on, were they there at the last session? Did they hear me talk about this? This is your prep. This is not an essay you're going to write. This is you sitting quietly as the coach with some points in your head thinking, am I on top of this? Secondly, you have a good understanding of the process. Am I clear about my purpose for the conversation and the kind of end goal I am aiming for? Am I going to walk away with a teacher who can answer those questions? Am I working with the teacher and have I to consider the purpose and end goal from the teacher's perspective? Do I need to check with this teacher? In other words, I need to be able to answer those questions. I need to think about the strengths the teacher is, what strengths is the teacher bringing to this conversation? Particularly, I've mentioned their practice. I want to go two other directions. I want to actually talk about their moral purpose, and sometimes that gets lost in conversations or it's a little buzzword. When we're training and I'm training instructional leaders or providing support to instructional leaders, what I understand from this is people say, oh, I want to get started with this. I say, great, it's great, practice analyst conversation, blah, blah, blah. And they say, yeah, because I want to work with Madge. I said, who's Madge? Oh, she's a tough nut to crack. Now, here's the kicker. You do not start with Madge. You do not start with Madge. You learn from someone who's willing to come with you on the journey and you get your legs on this. Madge is to be saved for a special day. When you've got your skills, you know. So this is it. You need to be are you on the same page? Because you want to grow and then take it. So it's not from you're at the unknown. We want to get to the known. We want you to be not just clunky in this. We want you to feel quite fluent in this. And more of this, we want you to be able to do it in one setting of teacher to multiple. But do not take the biggest challenge on first. And finally, you're wanting someone who's on that journey about being more curious. Now, when you start with working with beginning teachers or early career teachers, they're absolutely phenomenal to work with. You can see it just being absorbed through their skin. It makes you feel very old sometimes because you look at their beautiful skin, you're thinking, oh my gosh, it's just all going in. I'm envious. But that's what they're like. And it's joyous and it's why you're in the profession. But you're looking for but sometimes when you start working with them, what's the difference? They basically say, tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. Do I go A or do I go B? If you say C, that's okay. I thought of D, but that's not important. C is it, because you're going to say C, aren't you? And I'm going, oh my goodness. So you have to balance that. Challenges. Well, I talked about the strengths. We also need to think about the challenges. And one of the challenges with beginning teachers is that they're so willing to please, they're not self-regulatory. They may be growing in awareness, but they're not self-regulatory. And that's where we need to grow. Also, it's the actionable knowledge. They're emerging in their career, and you need to think about where to pitch, where they're at this time. You can't take them there, you need to build. And we're moving fast through this, relationships. The work underpinning this is relational trust. I'm going to probably get to a slide, if not today, I will look in this session, in the next session. But the work around relational trust is pivotal to my work as a coach and working with other instruction leaders. If it's not there, it's not going to happen. So let me move on. So this is what happens in the conversations, getting back to where we are. Yes, that's where we came. We're getting on to, remember, that's the cycle. So let's see what happens. So this is what happens is you've gone to your practice and you've gone to your pre-conversation, yes. The teacher's gone back into the classroom. You've observed respectfully. by the way, respectfully doesn't mean that you have the clipboard that is the humongous clipboard of all times, or the notebook that as you turn the page writing your notes goes clatter, clatter. You have to be a discreet observer. You are not there as a supervisor. You are there as a coach. Coaches do not write down word, sentence, line by line. What you are looking for is evidence to bring to the conversation. There's a difference. So this isn't the observation, the teaching. Your eye and ear is attuned to what is the behaviour, the language that you want to capture to bring back. It is not word by word, line by line. It's the emerging, interesting observations that you bring. So discreet, please. Not the, the flick of the clipboard and the pen scrawling across. And sometimes challenging. So what's happening in the conversation? You come back, you set the scene. You do not spend 10 minutes in the interpersonal process saying, oh, what a lovely class. What gorgeous children. Oh, I wish I was back in the classroom again. Oh, I know Timothy is always like that. Every time he sees me, he just clings, doesn't he? No, we don't want all that. Not that guff. What we want to do is get into it. Because the reality of it is, we want this to be the point. They know while you're there. They need to know what you are thinking. They do not want to guess what's in your head. It's not 20 questions. So therefore, it's pivotal. State your point of view, coaches. This is what I'm thinking, and the reason I'm thinking this is because. Do you get the idea? Don't muck around. They're interested. But most importantly, inquire into their actions. So in other words, over to them, what are they thinking? But get it out of the way. Not just go straight there. Why? Because if you inquire into their actions first, my observations and analysis of at least 10 to 15 on-the-run observations where I put it straight to the teacher, guess what happens when you go straight to the teacher? What will they say? I didn't teach that's not normally how it goes. Oh, he's usually very good. I don't think he slept last night. If only he'd had his breakfast. I don't want to hear that. I was better yesterday. I'll be better. I don't want to hear that. I want to get it out there. Do you get the difference? And then allow them to respond. Then what happens is the working around that. And I want to come further to is I've stated my position. I've stated my grounds. Now I'm going to inquire into what they were thinking and what they thought was happening. Do you get the idea? So the idea being is there's no wasting of time. The idea, though, is that you're checking for understanding out of this. You want to make sure you're on the same page. I've said what I'm thinking. You've said what you're thinking. Now we're going to check in to make sure we're on the same page. Why? Why do we need to be on the same page? Why do I need to check in to make sure I've heard that person really carefully? Because everything I do now will be based on it. And unless we've got the groundwork, we're just mucking around. Do you get the idea? We go into the next phase on the basis of we're on a common agreement about what we're thinking and what's happening. And on to the further out from that, making an agreed plan. You don't need to read this, but this was the complexity of the framework the team were involved in. They gave significant amounts of time to this. We have adapted it and we're refining it and thinking about how it will be more useful. But what I want to share with you is some of the commentary we got from this. Listen, this is from some of the transcripts that I'm sharing with you. This is the tightness of it. Here is the instructional leader negotiating the agenda and being clear about the purpose before she goes in. Okay, T, thanks for asking me to come and observe your writing session today. I know you are concerned about the kids' writing growth as I am, and by asking me to watch your session, it gives us both a shared basis to discuss what may be possibly getting in the way and a clearer view of a few things that are worth examining further. Teacher, okay, yes, I'm really concerned about their writing. It's horrible and I don't know what to do about it. They have not moved in their writing clusters from term 1. Well, most of them anyway. Okay, do you want to send, that's life? Oh my goodness. I have now 5 minutes to pull the threads together, but would you like a moment to consider what hits you about this conversation? What hits you about this is negotiating the agenda and being clear about the purpose. Do you want to have a quick moment to think? Okay, shall we come back? What hits you around this? There's no mucking around, is there? It's straight to it. What else is hitting you? Who hasn't any idea? She's a young teacher. I'm really concerned. Yeah, but she's not. What's hitting me is that we haven't said, I'm going to tell you. It's you are concerned about the kids' writing growth as I am. So it's us, not I will fix this. And by asking me to watch your session, it gives us both a shared basis, not I'm going to tell you the answer. So this is why we're working with these young teachers, is to support them. Yes? Say that again? We'd have to find out, wouldn't you? The idea of this is, in this sense, is to share that there's no pussyfooting around by the IL to say, what would you like me to do today? Or you will do this. Linking evidence of teaching practice and data. We can go more into these in the other session if you wish. Now, people, when they see this, say to me, the teacher voice is not as there often as in some sessions as the others. And the idea being from this, that they think that there'll be a lot of the teacher in this. What I want to share with you, it's variable, but what we got from this was that over time we had teachers that were more empowered to contribute. Sometimes someone said to me, well, why didn't the IL just sit there and wait for the teacher to come up with the answer? You could be waiting some time. So you have to shape the specificity of the language and transparency. I'm going to come back, I think, to later, but what I would suggest to you is these transcripts are very revealing about, as you can see in this one, how the teacher is shifting. I think I still have to process a lot of this, but I'd really like to try the things we've talked about today and see if it makes a difference. I'm not doubting you, but it is different to what I was thinking. So it's the engagement, we're getting a shift in the way teachers are thinking around the process. When we move next session, I want to look at a slide around metacognition. Okay, I have 2 minutes and I know the gong's going to go really badly. Where did we come out of this? At the end of the evaluation, through the data we collected, both quantifiable and qualitative, we found 4 shifts. One was the change in the instructional leaders' professional conversations with teachers. 2, we were able to evaluate the impact of the conversations on the teachers. 3, we were able to impact on the students. But we also found what was working in professional learning. So we hear ILs actually talking about what they saw happening. Repeating my own beliefs and opinions more isn't going to make them think the same way. Or teachers. We were using actual data that I had collected, and therefore the conversation was purposeful and it was about getting the children where they need to be. So the teachers actually are talking about quite articulately. This is the IL saying. It can also suggest ways of future direction rather than me identifying where to and what to. Future direction. And finally, I cannot be more grateful for having X as my instruction leader. I've been teaching for 10 years, but I feel like this year my practices have just completely revolutionised, and it is just amazing to see results. There's nothing more telling than the progress your students make. All three of us teachers have learnt so much from Ayel. She worked with three. Her differentiation is just fantastic. She has guided all of us, and we've seen such great results. And the impact? Not only can we talk about children on track, but students are explaining their understandings more in conversations and writing more compound and complex and when expressing themselves. So, what I will share with you is, as a closing note, the hardest thing about this. Someone said to me, I'd be interested in doing this. I said, let me tell you what is involved in this. You actually have to sit down and listen to yourself and then transcribe it. And that is hard work, not just the transcription, but actually listening to yourself. However, the comment from this instruction leader, undertaking the actual transcribing myself was a lengthy process, but greatly assisted me in thinking about what I had said. In that sprint for 40 minutes, what I've tried to share with you is a project that I undertook with Helen and with the support of 20 amazing instructional leaders that were working alongside us in the Department of Education in 2017. What did we learn? Well, this is the big ticket for me, was what we did get shift for students. But what I thought that Helen had thought was going to be hard, there were people in the group who were long-term instructional leaders, as well as people early in their career. So we had a diverse group. And she said to me, do you think we'll get shift? She said, they're already good. But we thought it would be difficult to shift behaviours that have been developed over a long time. But what we saw, that everyone grew. Everyone grew. From the 20-year veteran as a coach, as a mentor, to the person who was in their first year. And that was what we found from this experience working collaboratively. And mostly, we got teachers who developed high levels of efficacy and responsible for student outcomes. No more challenging children with horrible families. That wasn't the conversation any longer. It was about what can we do for the children. So thank you.